Resume. Hi guys, so welcome to week 2 of this series. We are talking about the 7 centers of consciousness. This comes out of a book by Ken Keyes. This book is called The Handbook to Higher Consciousness. It just happened to be something that I came across, and I wanted to share with you guys some of the stuff that I'm learning. So last week we went over the 7 centers of consciousness. I'll show them to you guys here. We have at the bottom security, sensation, power, love, cornucopia, conscious awareness, and cosmic consciousness. So what was cool was last week we were able to talk about the bottom 3, security, sensation, and power. Tonight we're going to be talking about love, and we're also going to be talking about how that relates to sex, since that seems to be something that Ken talks about quite a bit in his book. And I'll read to you guys some of those passages that he has on that. So what are the 7 centers of consciousness? If you missed us last week, the 7 centers are, Ken describes them as these filters that our brain puts on all of the information that we are receiving every single day. And the reason why we need these filters is because if you just took a second and looked at all of the input that's coming to us in any given moment, all of the sounds, all of the sights, all of the busyness that is happening around us, all of that energy, we have to figure out a way for our brain to compute what is actually going on. And so our brain uses these different centers, and inside of these centers, they're like a filter where our brain can filter out the things that it believes are not relevant in this moment and only show us the things that are relevant. So we talked about that first security center. That center, when we're in there, we are blocking out anything outside of things that could potentially be harmful to us. Our brain is looking for threats. It's looking for information about our safety. So we use the example of like if you're an animal out in the wilderness and all of a sudden you hear a noise, you immediately are inside of the security center because you are nervous about whether that is going to be a predator or whether it's just another animal in the bushes. And so your brain is only going to look at, only going to pay attention to the things that are relevant inside of keeping you safe. We talked about how that could help or hinder us as human beings as well. Obviously, being secure is very good. Having fear can be good. It can keep us safe. But oftentimes, if we're stuck inside of that security center, we're constantly going to be only looking at, only aware of the things that could potentially cause us harm. And we talked about how we could get into a loop as a human being and really stuck inside of all of these what if questions. You know, what if I lose my job? What if he leaves me? What if my kid gets sick? What if I catch the virus? Whatever that looks like, we're constantly sitting in a space of, am I safe? And when we're doing this, our brain is only going to show us things that are either going to prove that we're not safe or prove that we are safe. And so we talked about the next center was the sensation center. This is when our filters are only showing us things that are pleasing to our senses. So our senses are extremely powerful. We can smell, we can see, we can hear, we can touch, we can do all of these things. And so our brain, it wants to be pleased. Now we're designed this way in nature because if things did not satisfy us, we wouldn't do them, right? So we talked a little bit about if sex wasn't pleasing, we probably wouldn't mate. If food didn't taste good, we probably wouldn't eat. It's very important that we do those things for our survival. So we have these things built into us that wants the pleasure, that wants to look for these things. We also have the power center. The power center, inside of this center, our brain is showing us all of the things that can help us gain power inside of our environment. This is like the hierarchy of animals, right? To be at the top, you get better food choices, you get, you know, better mating partners inside of this world that we've created as humans. We have more money, we have more materialistic things, we have more friends, maybe, maybe not. And so these bottom 3 layers, these bottom 3 centers, I really identify these centers as being animalistic centers. These are the centers that we share with all of the other mammals on the planet. We are all fixated on keeping ourselves safe, making sure that we're reproducing, making sure that we're eating, and also we're fascinated with the hierarchy. We want to be the dominant creature. We want to be the one that's in charge. And so we focused on these 3 centers last week because these are really the 3 centers that a lot of people, the majority of people, are operating out of. But Ken describes in the book that there's actually centers above these as well. We have the love center, the cornucopia center, the conscious awareness center, and also the cosmic consciousness center. And so when we're in these higher centers, the things that our brain is allowing us to see, allowing us to focus on, the things that it's filtering out that are irrelevant, and the things that it's showing us are really magical. They start to change the way that we feel because there are feelings associated with each one of these centers. If we think about security center, the feelings that come along with a lack of security, maybe we're fearful, maybe we're worried, maybe we're anxious, right? When we think about the sensation center, of course, having pleasure is nice, but what ends up happening is we create these addictions to our sensation. And the more addicted we become, the more irritated we get when we're not getting what it is that we want. And by design, we're constantly looking for more. Ken talks about this in his book when he says, a lot of us, for example, will become addicted to sex. And in these moments, we'll find ourselves having a sexual partner, having an amazing orgasm, and yet as soon as it's over, we're on search for another, And it doesn't matter how many times you have sex in your life, how many great orgasms you have, we're still looking for more. And if you're somebody who cannot get that, you can't attract your partner, or you can't get that release, you start to get irritated with yourself. We see this with drugs, we see this with alcohol, we see this with online shopping, money. I mean, people are addicted to a lot of different things. One of the things that I want to point out that Ken talks about is that instead of being addicted to something, which addicted means that you are attached to its outcome, you're really concerned with how it's going to end. Instead, he encourages us to up-level from addictions to preferences. I prefer to have this, but I'm not attached to the outcome if I don't get that. And he says that it's in changing your addictions, and we have addictions in all 3 of those bottom centers. We have addictions to security, we have addictions to sensation, we have addictions to power. And when we can change those addictions into preferences, it frees up the space to allow us to get into higher levels of consciousness. So that next level of consciousness is love. And I wanted to spend the whole class today talking about this one center because I really think we have a lot of opportunity to grow inside of this center. So I wanted to point this out to you guys. In our bottom 3 centers, the security, the sensation, and the power, they may include other people, right? So you may be concerned about the security of your family. You might be concerned not with just with your own food, but food for your family. Right? You might not just care about your own well-being and how you feel. You might also care about your friends or your family and how they feel. But it's not necessary. So you can operate in these lower 3 centers solely fixated on yourself. Am I secure? Do I have what I want? Do I have power or control? You do not need to include anybody else inside of the thoughts that you have when you're inside of these centers. Now that changes when you get to this 4th center, this love center. When you're in the love center, what happens is that your brain starts to kick out the things that are irrelevant, and it only shows you things that are relevant to the things that are aligned with the love center. You start to have your preferences, of course. You prefer for things to be a certain way, but you're in a space of giving love to everything. And when I talk about love here, what I'm talking about is unconditional love. I want to talk just a second about unconditional love because love is a word, love is an action, love can be a feeling. And I think that we've perverted the word love. Real quick, let me back up and just say, most of us are only operating from the bottom 3 centers because we were raised by people in a society who were also operating out of those lower 3 centers. So for a lot of us, we don't even understand that something outside of these 3 centers can even exist. So if you had a family or parents, for example, who were operating out of those lower three centers, they were going to condition you to operate out of those lower three centers as well. And so a lot of us have become conditioned to believe what love is, what it looks like, what it feels like, who's deserving of our love, who isn't deserving of our love. And so when we look at this love, what we're going to have to do is challenge a lot of the preconceived notions that we have about it, as well as be able to look at the way that we've been conditioned by society or by the culture inside of our family or inside of our communities, for us to be able to really look at this. So back to love. Love for a lot of us is very conditional, and this starts at a very young age. So I'm going to use this example. Oh, I have my phone in front of me. I have my phone, let's say, in my hand, and I just got this phone. It's my first phone, right? I'm a young kid. And what do I say? I say, I love my phone, right? Now I take my phone everywhere. It takes all these pictures. It does all these wonderful things. I'm able to communicate with everybody. I love my phone. Now, what happens when that phone stops working? Do I continue to love it? Is it unconditional? Am I still going to carry it around in my purse or in my back pocket? Am I still going to say all these nice things about it? No, it's no longer working for me. So what I do is I don't love that phone anymore. I toss it out, and now I'm going to go get a new phone, a new upgraded phone. And this phone is the phone that I love. I thought I liked my old one. Now I love my new one. And again, in 2 years, when that phone stops working for me, it stops giving things to me that I want it to give. It's no longer, I no longer have security in my phone because it keeps breaking or it won't hold the charge. It's no longer fulfilling my sensations anymore. Maybe it's not a very good camera, or there's not enough room for me to download my newest games or whatever that looks like. It's no longer offering me power because it's not the newish version of the phone. Hang on one second while we pause our television that just randomly started playing. Thanks, babe. It's no longer giving me power anymore because it's not the coolest phone, so no one's giving me attention for having it anymore. So I throw it to the side and I no longer love it. Now, we've been taught that that's what love is. That as long as whatever it is that we're choosing to love is meeting all of our needs, then we'll love it. But if it's not meeting our needs anymore, then we take our love away from it. And I'm here to challenge you and to advise you that that's not actual love. Now, I think the reason why love is so perverted inside of our community, and perverted not meaning in a sexual way, although it could be, but perverted meaning it's twisted. We're looking at it differently in a way that it wasn't ever meant to be looked at. I think one of the reasons why that has happened is because in our language, we have one word for love, but love is so many different things. And I think for a lot of us, we have attached love with romance. And we also live in a society that teaches us that a good romantic partner looks a certain way. Now, this is where our preferences come into play. You may prefer, let's say, to be in a monogamous relationship. Now, that is socially acceptable. We see it all the time inside of the movies. Cheating is wrong. We should just have one partner. If they want anyone besides you, then they're a horrible being and they do not deserve your love. Now, if we flip back to the biological understanding of us as humans or animalistic tendencies, and we see that the desire to mate actually comes inside of our sensation center. There's a reason for it. We need to produce to keep going as a human, race. The biological need to want to reproduce or to be with people is biological. So for some people, they have chosen not to be in a monogamous relationships, but to have multiple partners. We see this becoming more and more socially acceptable as we move on, but there's still a lot of people that feel that monogamy is the only way. So if you meet someone and your preference is to be in a monogamous relationship, and their preference is to be in an open relationship. You can use your discernment to say, this is somebody who is not currently aligned with what I want in my life. You can choose not to be in a relationship with that person, but you can still extend unconditional love to that being as another being who's just like you, may have different preferences, but is just like you, a human just like you, trying to figure out what their desires actually are, experiencing and living in this world. And so I really want us to understand that when we're talking about this love center, we are not talking about a conditional love. We are talking about unconditional love. A lot of us can understand this more when we're parents. You have a child, and even if that child spills their drink, makes a mess, gets dirty, whatever the case may be, you still love that child. It's not based on their condition to behave or not. It is simply something that is extended to them because it is natural for you to love them, for you to care about their well-being, and no matter what it is that they do, you may decide if they're unhealthy to cut ties with them, but I can almost guarantee your love for them will never leave. And that can be true for every single person. So when we're operating from the center of love, what's really cool is that the universe is going to show us, it's going to use that love filter, and it's going to show us evidence of why we should be loving, why we should be accepting, why we should be compassionate to other people. Now, we talked about the feelings that are associated with these bottom 3 levels. The feelings that arise inside of the love center is joy, peace, tranquility. Now, if you're an up-level student of mine, you understand the importance of our emotions, because our emotions are directly connected to the vibration that we are giving out into the world. And vibration is so important because when we release vibration into the world, our vibration attracts like vibration, so we can pull more of it into our existence. So if we're constantly operating from the security center, let's say, where feelings like fear and doubt and uncertainty are front and center, we will vibrate at that frequency, and we will continually attract situations to ourselves where we will feel fearful or doubtful or worried, which only perpetuates us staying inside of that center. And so what's cool about this is once you operate from the love center, you will find it very easy to stay inside of the love center because your vibration will be attracting like vibration to you, and you will be surrounded by love, by compassion, by other people who are vibrating at your frequency. This is really cool because it means that among all of these people inside of society, you will naturally be closest to the people who are operating like you're operating, who are thinking like you're thinking. So we get these little clicks everywhere. You ever notice that like people who are really down and out hang out with other people who are really down and out? And people who are really happy and successful hang out with people who are really happy and successful? There's a reason why that happens, because we are drawn to people based on where we are currently operating out of. So I want to talk a little bit about how this relates to our sex lives because I found this very fascinating. I'm going to read you something that Ken wrote in his book, and I'm going to admit that when I first heard Ken talk about our addiction to sex, I was like, what is this guy talking about? I'm not addicted to sex. But check out what he says because this really resonated with me. If you are like many people, sex may be your most sought after sensation. Your lifestyle may be designed to provide you with sexual sensation. The people you choose to be with, the clothes you buy, the home you live in, your style of speech, thinking, and action that you have developed will tend to be determined by whatever you calculate will make you appeal to the sexual partners you most desire. This is known as subject-object sex, in which you are the subject and treat others in your life as sexual objects. I was blown away when I read this Because I think when I originally heard him say that we're all addicted to sex, I assumed that he meant the actual act, the physical act of having sex. But as he describes that so much of what we do is actually done from a space of wanting to attract a mate, a sexual mate, I really resonated with that. Because almost every decision that I have made is all about whether or not I will be attractive to my partner. How much money I make, the jobs I have, whether I'm going to school or not, the clothes that I wear, the makeup I do or do not wear, how I wear my hair, how I speak. Over the years, as I've taught more and more, people will come up to me and say, I really like the way you do X, Y, and Z. And because I've figured out that that's attractive to people, I continue to do those things because I want to be attractive. There is something about being able to attract somebody that is extremely powerful. But I want to talk about sex inside of these centers. So if you guys could all think for a moment, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but think about, have you ever had sex while being in the security center? So you're thinking about your security. This could be in a way like this. Maybe you're saying, if I sleep with this person, they will love me or they will date me, and that gives me security. Or it may be a little bit more intense, like if I fight back or say no, this person could hurt me, or they could overpower me, or there could be negative consequences if I don't have sex with this person. Sensation center. I've definitely had sex inside of the security center, and I've definitely had sex inside of the sensation center. This feels pleasing. This feels good. I want this to continue, right? Then there's also sex inside of the power center. This could look different ways. For somebody who, let's say, is a rapist, there is something very powerful about being able to hold somebody down and force them into this act. So in that case, they're operating out of the power center. But it could be the other person in the power center, like a woman who thinks, if I sleep with him, I'll get this promotion, or I'll get this job opportunity, or whatever it is that they're going after. When I sat and reflected on this, I actually found that the majority of the time when I'm having sex, I'm operating out of these lower three centers. When I was actually able to have sex from the love center, it was a completely different experience. Think about when you're operating from the security center and you have that filter on, where you're only noticing the things that could be potential threats. Now think about that in the space of having sex with somebody while in the security center. What would you notice about that other person? You would probably notice the amount of aggression that they were using, the amount of force that they were using, their word choice, constantly on edge and fearful of the way that this is going to go. I remember for me, my first sexual experience was a forced sexual experience. I was sexually assaulted, and the whole time I remember being fearful of how much further he was going to take it. I was constantly worried about, is he going to try and do more? Am I going to have to do something other than what I'm doing right now? So the things that my brain was seeing through this filter were all of the very scary things that were happening. Now, the reason why I want to point this out is because the things that were happening inside of the security center, the actual details of what was happening, there was a man, there was me, there was things we were engaging in, there was penetration. All of those things are the same details that showed up inside of the love center, but the filter was different. I was still there with the man. I was still having sex. We were still engaging in activity. There was still penetration. But what my brain allowed me to focus on inside of that moment created a completely different experience for me. Now, Ken talks about how our experiences really have everything to do with our emotional relationship with what it is that we are experiencing. It's not necessarily the details of what we are experiencing so much as it is the way that we've emotionally connected to what it is that we are experiencing. And that emotional connection has so much to do with what center we are operating out of. I want to stop for a quick second and just see, is this landing for you guys? Is it making sense? Does anybody have any questions so far?
That makes sense.
Anything coming up for you guys that you want to talk about?
No, but it makes sense.
Okay. So Ken talks a lot about our emotional reaction to things that are taking place. Here's another example. Inside of the security center, you may have somebody who has generally been poor all of their life. And because they have operated in this state of being poor, and they saw it in their family, the amount of money that that person needs to feel secure may not be very much. But you could also have somebody who was raised around millionaires, billionaires, they're used to having plenty. This person could have $1 million in the bank and still feel a lack of security. This has nothing to do with the details of how much money they actually have in the bank. This has everything to do with the emotional connection that they have made to the amount of money that they have in the bank. The same way that for me, it wasn't about engaging in sex, it was about the emotional connection to what I was experiencing inside of the sex that was causing the conflict for me. This is important to understand if we're wanting to move up into higher levels of consciousness. Because in order for us to get past that third level of consciousness and open up love and cornucopia and conscious awareness, cosmic conscious awareness, we have to be able to see outside of ourselves, outside of our own conditioning, outside of our own emotional reactions to things, and understand that you can have your preferences. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, it is a beautiful thing that we are all unique and individual and have our preferences. But we have to understand that our preferences, when we're not receiving them, that is not the time that we want to get stuck inside of our emotional reactions to them. We can watch our emotional reactions like we're watching a movie. There was a guy that I was listening to that was actually talking about his takeaways from reading Ken's book. And he was talking about how he has learned how to watch his brain from the perspective of watching a movie. Now, this is something that we've talked about inside of Up Level. We've talked about watching our thoughts, watching our astral bodies, watching our egos as if they were outside of us, like a movie. Now, the reason we want to do this is because there's something about our brain, when it watches a movie, it's able to look at things that it normally would not be able to look at, because we use the validation that this is not real, it's just a movie, it's just a narrative that somebody else is putting together. So let's say you're watching a horror movie. Some people can't watch horror movies, I don't like them. But if you were watching somebody being murdered in front of you, it would be a completely different emotional reaction than you watching somebody be murdered on television. This is why so many of us can watch these like serial killer shows or these weird, crazy, demonic shows, and we have no emotional reaction to them. But if they were happening right in front of us, we would be sick to our stomach. There's this separation that our brain allows when we're seeing something and saying, this is just a false narrative. It's just a storyline. It's not real. We can do the same thing with our minds, with our thoughts, and with our emotions. Everything that we're thinking, everything that we're feeling, it's all been programmed into us by our upbringing and our society and our experiences, what people have told us about our experiences. Oftentimes when we're young and we're having a traumatic thing happen to us and we go to somebody we trust, they tell us how to perceive that situation. They explain to us why this bad thing has happened. And we take whatever they say as truth, and it becomes our truth. When we can start to watch our emotional reactions, our thought processes, all of that, when we can start to look at our centers as if they were a movie that was happening in front of us, we're able to enjoy the drama that we all are super addicted to. Nobody wants to watch a monk meditating for 20 hours on television. That's not fun. We like drama. We like all of that jazz. We can still watch it, but we can watch it with a safe distance like it was a movie. So when I am noticing that I am in the power center, my ego has flared up. My ego wants to set me apart from the person in front of me because that will make me feel more powerful. I can see how my brain starts to compute what's wrong with them and why am I better. I can start to hear the thoughts in my mind validating why I am better than this person. I can sit back and watch it like a movie and know this is not truth. That person is not any less than I am. I am not any better than they are. I can sit on that truth while still watching the brain do what the brain does, appreciate the fact that the brain has the ability to operate out of the power center because it is an important center at some times, but I don't have to become a victim of whatever is happening inside of that center. I don't have to become a victim of whatever emotions are popping up for me inside of that moment. I can easily watch it and then return back to the love center and see that this person is no different from me. This person is learning and experiencing just like me, and this person is growing and developing just like me, and there's no race, there's no contest. We're in this together. We actually talk about this inside of our up-level class, and we refer to this as reaching for the next best thought. When we notice that a thought makes us feel bad, like I am better than that person, we can take a moment and we can reach for next best thoughts in order to soften our heart and open up ourselves to have empathy and compassion for whatever that person is going through. Or we can lean on the fact that it may be our preference, it may be our truth, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that person's truth or that person's perception at that time. So how are you guys feeling? This is a lot of information to take in. I'm kind of curious what you guys' thoughts are.
I was just getting ready to ask you if it was the same as searching for the next best thought. And I think what came up for me listening to that, I was like, you hear people, I don't know, I guess it's my conditioning where you think like operating from love is bad all the time. Like, I don't know how to explain what I mean, but like how people have said that like loving for the wrong reason or loving because you're insecure or loving for bad reasons. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's what came up when you're talking. Like I just felt like.
Absolutely. So I think the difference here is what center you're operating out of when you think you're giving love. So I believe love is really unconditional, that there's no such thing as conditional love. I think that that's an oxymoron, that love is unconditional in and of itself. But we've been taught that love is conditional. And so it's possible for us to believe that we are experiencing something called love, even though we're not really experiencing love at all. So when you're talking about loving for the wrong reasons, like insecurities, looking at these centers, if I'm experiencing insecurity, what center am I actually in?
Security.
I'm in the security center. So I am willing to exchange what I believe is love to this person in exchange for them providing for me a sense of security. That's not actually love. That is the subject-object love that he was talking about inside of his book, where I'm the subject, I've made you the object. You're an object that's giving me something. In this case, you're giving me security. And because of that, I will pay my dues and quote unquote, give you love. But what happens when you're no longer making me feel secure anymore? I kick you to the curb. because you're not providing for me anymore. The object, just like the phone, we're seeing them as an object. They're not giving us what we need anymore, so they become irrelevant. And now we want to search for somebody else who can give us security. This is where I believe that whole saying, you have to love yourself first before you can love somebody else, comes from. Is
Right, I
because
was kind of
really
thinking that.
yeah, and really the message that they're trying to give there is, until you feel secure in yourself, until you feel secure with your own addictions to sensation, until you feel secure in your own power and value, your own worth, you can't possibly operate from the love center, which is where you're extending love to somebody because you're extending love to somebody. And if that person is not in alignment with what you want, you can still love them and just choose not to be inside of a relationship with them. When you feel the need to hold love back from someone, then that tells me that that's a give and take relationship. And that's not what love is about. Love is just about extending. It's really important, though, that we do recognize that there is discernment when it comes to love, just like there's discernment with everything. If you really enjoy the taste of milk and you have milk every single night, but you open up that carton and you take a whiff and you go, oh no, this milk has spoiled. It is okay for you to dump the milk down the drain and let it go and still choose to enjoy milk. That one batch was just not good for you, right? So
Right.
it's important for us to understand that extending love does not mean you allow without having personal boundaries or self-respect. You can love someone and still not be in a relationship with them. You can love someone and still choose not to be sexual with them. And this is why that word love, I feel, is so perverted and twisted, because for some reason we've attached it to this idea of a romantic relationship, where love is not necessarily about romantic relationships. It's so much bigger than that. Hence our children, our friendships, our parents, our teachers. We have love for so many other beings besides romantic partnerships, and yet we've kind of collapsed these two. So it becomes difficult for us because our brain wants to go, well, wait, should I be loving this person? AKA, should I be in a relationship with them or not? And that's a conversation to be had, but it's not a conversation about love. It's a conversation about alignment with what this person actually wants for the lifestyle and whether it's in alignment with what you want for your lifestyle. Having unconditional love for that person would mean not judging them for not wanting what you want, allowing them to just be, and acknowledging that their desire to live their life how they want to live it is not dependent on you and your life and how you want to live it. You both can have what you want. You're both deserving of what you want. And you know what I mean?
Sorry, I messed it up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It definitely makes sense. Thank you. Thanks.
It's kind of crazy when you start to think about it, because when I started really looking at love and whether my love was conditional or not, I can't think of the words. It was overwhelmingly shocking when I actually sat down and started to think about how much of the love that I was extending to people, the so-called love, was actually conditional. I was willing to love them as long as they were meeting my needs. And when they weren't meeting my needs, I got angry and irritated with them. And this is what Ken talks about, the dangers of being stuck inside the sensation center. Is because what we do is we start to get angry and upset when people are not satisfying us. And he talks about how true satisfaction comes in releasing the expectations for what it needs to look like and allowing ourselves into the higher levels of consciousness where we actually find true peace, not a makeshift peace, not a peace that we only feel when we're getting what we want or what we desire, not a peace that we only feel when we have money in the bank or when we feel secure, but an actual peace, being able to see the world from a different level. When I think about higher consciousness, I think about the vision that we have, the way that we perceive the world is literally expanding higher, 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 so we can see everything. I once heard this concept. Somebody was describing, it was they were talking to a person who said, why does God allow people to starve? And the person had a very interesting perspective on it. They said, you know, from our perspective, starvation doesn't exist here because we have plenty. From the perception of somebody in a country where starvation is actually happening, starvation is a very real thing. Now, when we think about from God's perspective, whoever God is for you, if we say he, right, for lack of better terms, from his perspective, there's enough food on this planet for everybody. So for him, starvation only exists because of our own greed, our own need for security, for sensation, for power. It has nothing to do with a lack of him providing for us. It has everything to do with our own internal instincts on overload, or we're scared, or we want more, right? Now, if we're thinking from a security point of view, this is like what hoarding looks like, right? I'm not gonna have enough, so I wanna keep all the food to myself. Sensation is I want the food I want when I want it, and I don't have to wait for it. And we don't care that it gets taken from other countries as long as we have it available to us here and now. It's not so much about having enough, it's about having what we want to taste. And then we think about in the power center, we want the ability to have it, we want the ability to afford it, right? And so because we want the ability to have and to afford all of the nice things, we have to drive the cost of food down, which means we drive the quality down, which means somebody has to work for nothing. And so when we think about the dynamics of the society and the culture that we've created, that's what's actually causing starvation, not God. And it was so interesting when I read this, because I started to think about, what does it look like from God's point of view? What does it look like from way up there looking down on the earth? Is it just humans? Or does it see everything? Does it think about just my desires or my needs? Or is it thinking about the desires and the needs of every living thing on this planet? What part of our brain convinces us that humans are the only ones that matter? That's our obsession with identity, being important. We're all important, but so is all of life. I've been watching this really cool documentary called One Strange Rock. And it's essentially a documentary where they're taking a look at how strange Earth is and how much is actually happening that we're not even aware of. And what I love is that the people who have come onto this documentary and share, they're astronauts. So they have collectively 1,000 days in space. And they're talking about how they perceived the world so much differently when they could back up and see it as one living, breathing organism. This earth is alive. And they talked about how when they traveled over it, they could see the way that it was alive, the way that what was happening on one side of the planet was actually supporting and helping the other side of the planet. The way that the dust storms on one side of the planet was actually being blown over continents and falling onto the ground and acting as soil, acting as fertilizer for forests to grow. And then how those forests let off this water, and then that water would be carried around to another part of the planet. And seeing the way everything was connected, seeing the way everything worked. And what was really cool about this was I started to get a grasp of what these higher level of consciousness look like. A level of consciousness, the top one is called cosmic consciousness. It is you're aware of life on a cosmic level, that this is so much bigger than what our brains have tried to make it. I was with my daughter the other day, and I love this about her. She's very introspective. And we were looking at these ant hills. And she had asked me, do you think the ants think that this is all that exists? Is this little world that they live in? Do you think they know that there's a China or a Russia or other planets? And it was so awesome to hear her think about this, because I've often had this same thought about us. This is all we think exists. Our relationship problems, our parental problems, our job, money. It all seems really insignificant the higher up that you get inside of your conscious levels, awareness, so that you can see things and go, wow, I am just a small piece of something much larger. It's inside of those higher levels of consciousness that we start to see us as one, as a whole. One earth becomes one universe, one galaxy. Whatever's beyond that, it's all just working together to provide this thing called life that we get to experience, which is incredible. But we are not separate from it. And our brains are separate. My brain is not Jeff's brain, is not your brain. So our brains, they want to identify. They want to feel like it's just them. And this is why understanding our brain, understanding our mind is so important, because these resources that we were given, this mind, this brain that we were given, is extraordinary. But it's a gift, it's a tool. It's not who we are. It's not the end all be all. And it can be programmed to see things in a certain way, to think about things in a certain way, to tell ourselves certain narratives. And it's our job to expand it, to challenge it, to reprogram it, so that we're not constantly, as a group, continuing to recreate the same lives over and over and over again. This is about evolving. We want our kids, all of us, we want our kids to be better than us and do more than us. And if that's the type of approach that we have, and we start with ourselves first, and we can teach that to future generations, that's how we actually start to change this dynamic in this society that we've created, where we all kind of feel a little stuck and unfulfilled. Do you have anything else you want to add, my love? You guys have anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I don't.
A lot of information.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, and you know, I really encourage you guys that when we have these classes, when the information, because I try and remind everybody that this is something that I've been working on and studying for years. Like, it started for me like 7, 8 years ago. And so there's so much information, there's so much content that just that it can be overwhelming when we start to share this information, especially if we've never actually thought about these things before. And so the one thing that I have seen to help both me and other people is when we can converse back and forth. When we can talk about real life situations, real things that are popping up inside of our lives that are pushing on these concepts for us. Because we can learn all we want about a concept, but until we start applying it to our everyday life, it's not real. It's just something that we read. It's like those quotes that get circulated around Facebook. So oftentimes I'll see somebody share a quote and go, wow, the way that they live is not actually in alignment with that quote that they just said that they loved. Because so many of us love the concept, but the actual art of taking that concept and applying it to our life is where a lot of people struggle, me included. And so it's a great opportunity for us to talk to each other about what is actually happening in our lives, where we're actually seeing this show up, so that we can put some context, some real life context around what it is that we're talking about. That's really where I've seen the most growth. So I know it's challenging sometimes to be vulnerable and to share what's going on inside of us, but it's super important for our growth, and it's a safe place to do it. So I just want to invite you guys all to have that type of outlook. You guys are more than welcome to bring things to the call so that we can talk more in depth about them.
Okay.
All right, my lovelies. Well, thank you so much for being on tonight's call. We're going to have next week, we're going to be talking about the 3 higher levels or centers of consciousness. I know we talked about a lot today, so kind of let it sink in, and bring next week some things that are coming up for you guys. Kind of just pay attention this week. What center am I operating out of? What am I feeling? What am I seeing? What is my brain deciding to show me in this moment? And just having that awareness so that when we start to, go ahead.
Sorry, it's kind of, is it the same? Like, what, you know, when we're paying more attention to it, you know, if our ego's showing up, like what we're operating from, it's taking that to the next level.
Yeah, so I shared this in my original video, but one of the reasons why what I love about researching all of this stuff that I'm into is that I'll find a researcher or a healer from this part of the country, and then I'll find one from this part of the country, and they're both talking about very similar concepts, but they say it in different ways. And that is because each one of us has been conditioned, our brain has been programmed to receive information differently. So if you notice, these 7 centers very much mimic the 7 chakras. If you know anything about chakras and you start to learn about the different chakras, they're very much aligned with what Ken talks about for the centers.
So security.
I ironically just started rereading a book that I have on energetic healing. And it also talks about these 7 different centers in the body. Now, she's not referring to them in the same names as Ken is referring to them, but there's so much crossover. Now, this is what I find fascinating, how we can have these people that live on different continents, that speak different languages, that internally go inside of themselves to try and make sense of all this stuff that's happening. And they're coming up with very similar content, very similar concepts. There's something to that to me that tells me that there's some truth in what it is that they are teaching, because multiple people have come to these similar conclusions. So when I give lessons, oftentimes you're going to hear me refer to something that sounds very familiar to something that we've talked about before, but maybe we're using different language around it. What I love about Ken is his approach is very brain focused. Our brain causes us to see these centers in these ways. Our brain allows us to compute information these ways. The energy book that I'm reading about, hers is all about energy, more like the chakras, our energetic body. Something's happening in our energetic body, not just the brain. Now, I believe that everything is connected, mind, body, soul. It's like different parts of one working machine. So of course there's going to be all of it playing parts in all of it. But some people really relate and resonate to the brain. Some people really resonate with feelings and emotions. I think it all just kind of depends on that person's makeup. There's a reason why we have the astrology signs that we have, the diversity that we have inside of humans. I think it's all beautiful. So when you hear these concepts, I invite you not to get caught up in the actual terminology or the wording, or why this one's called something different than this, or what this is. Just look for the commonalities. Look for the parts of you that can identify these things in the real world, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that we've even identified them or that we've labeled them. all that actually matters is awareness, that we've become aware of something outside of just what we've been programmed to pay attention to.
That makes sense.
Makes sense.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining. I'm going to be sharing this recording online, so if you felt like somebody could take something from it, please share it or pass it along. I will see you guys on Friday, 7 p.m. Log on early so we can get started on time. I love you, ladies. Have a good night.
Bye. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.